Hello. Thank you for joining us today on LAPL's live YouTube for another mental health in collaboration with Los Angeles County Psychological Association. My name is Roya Rahimi. I am the young adult librarian at West Valley Regional Branch. I would like to introduce our today's guest speaker, Dr. Richard Espinoza. Dr. Espinoza, or Dr. E, as he has come to be known by his students and patients, is a licensed clinical psychologist who primarily serves the LGBTQ plus community and its allies. Dr. E disseminates his work through psychotherapy, public speaking, and developing digestible self-help worksheets and upcoming workbooks. Today's topic, coping with mass violence. Dr. Espinoza will explore and normalize the various reactions people have to mass violence, followed by skills and resources on how to better cope. Thank you for being here today, and you may type in your questions if you have any in the live chat box, and Dr. E will answer them at the end of his talk. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Roya, for such a wonderful introduction. So today's topic, it's a bit of a sensitive topic, but needs to be explored and discussed here. So today's theme is coping with mass violence, and we're going to just dive into it and see what that's about. We have a whole lot of content, and we only have 60 minutes to look at this. So rest assured, this is recorded as we speak and will be available, to look at a later time. So let's dive into it. So who's this talk for and what's it about? So first off, this talk is intended to give information on mass violence, what it is, how it can impact us, along with education, coping skills, tips, and resources to better manage the impacts of mass violence. So I need to maybe find a better term for this, but here's a non-trigger warning. So this talk will not show images of violence or weapons. The media has this covered. And my intention is not for people to walk away with vicarious trauma. So I don't want people walking away triggered by anything brought up here. So if you experience any discomfort during this talk, please know that skills and resources will be provided throughout this talk and listed in the back of this slide deck. And the slide deck is currently available on my website for free download. So how common is violence in our society? So directly from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has stated that injuries and violence are the leading causes of death. And this is a recent finding that was promoted a lot. So injuries and violence affect everyone, regardless of age, race, or economic status. So in the first half of life, more Americans die from injuries and violence, such as motor vehicle crashes, suicide, or homicides, than from any other cause. So including cancer, HIV, or the flu. So this makes injury the leading cause of death amongst persons aged 1 to age 44. So it's pretty significant. Violence is more and more, especially since the 80s, it's becoming the number one cause. I mean, if you just look at the bar chart here, I mean, it really stands out. I mean, the three colored ones are all aggressive ways to die. So specifically, what is mass violence? Well, mass violence, it's an umbrella term. So it's used to describe when someone causes harm to 4 or more persons in a public space. And this is informed by the FBI and also supported by the Center for Victim Research, which is a great resource that I'm going to suggest. So specifically, the US Secret Service, they refer to mass violence in more specific terms. So they refer to it as mass attacks in public spaces. And specific to their definition, it involves 3 or more victims. So not necessarily casualties or deaths. I always feel the word casualty is a little too casual, but 3 or more person have to be harmed or victimized in some way in a public space for the US Secret Service, this definition. So mass violence can include lots of things. So it can include in the US shootings, vehicular violence, detonating explosives, and other acts of terrorism. So I know these are all very heavy hitting topics, and I know we're kind of like a bull out the gates, but this is the working definition we currently have right now of violence, which is just harm to another person. And mass violence is harm to multiple people. And it doesn't take many, at least three to 4 people is the general consensus. So with the understanding of mass violence being an act of terrorism, if we frame mass violence as a type of domestic terrorism, so terrorism at home domestically, we can better understand the impacts of mass violence in terms of post-traumatic stress on a larger scale. So many of us have heard the term post-traumatic stress. It's just after you've suffered a traumatic event, it's carrying distress with you in your day-to-day life. So post-trauma stress. So guns in America. Mass violence, it can take many forms, as we've just seen. It could be a person driving through a crowd of people. It could be, unfortunately, an explosive, going off in a crowd of people. But particular to the United States, mass violence is commonly found as gun violence and mass shootings. So please feel free to look up this particular source. But as of August 13th, when I last checked in this past weekend, 411 mass shootings had happened in the US this year. So resulting, again, as of August 13th, 420 people dying and 1,772 injuries due to gun violence. And this information is provided by Gun Violence Archive, which is listed at the back, but also just a great resource. And they have live, up-to-date resources. So I imagine if anyone was to check in on this website right now, we would have up-to-date as of how many gun violence incidents happen as of today. My guess is that there would probably be more than 411. So in this country, we have something unique, specific to us in the United States. We are the only country that has more registered guns than registered citizens in the US. So therefore, many people may live with guns in their homes or just have them in their life somewhere or in their environment. You don't have to own a gun to be around guns and their culture. So in my opinion, firearms are steeped in our culture. Like, for example, think of all of the gun-related idioms we use in everyday language. So the little phrases that we say, it's just a part of our language in American English. We have phrases such as lock and load or calling shotgun. People say pull the trigger on a situation. People say I've got you in my crosshairs. Understanding the kickback, come out guns a-blazing, shoot me an email, fire away to begin something, shoot from the hip, being a straight shooter, and so on. So I'm sure people, in the comments could put more of these gun-related phrases that we use in everyday life. To date, it's just a part of our culture. Some people go so far as to say we have a gun obsession in this country. So when we've defined violence and what mass violence is, and particularly gun violence in this country, who's at risk? Well, the disheartening truth is that anyone who attends a mass gathering or goes into a public space can technically be at risk. And I don't mean that to scare people, I mean that to arm people with knowledge. So according to the Violence Project, a wonderful resource also, so 31% of mass shootings in its database occurred in workplaces, followed by retail sites, so stores, restaurants, and K through 12 schools. So schools, up from kindergarten all the way to seniors in high school and surpassing to universities, so people in college. So the vast majority of workplace shooters were insiders in the organization. And that's very scary to know, knowing that people who tend to harm others through means of mass violence, they know the area where they choose to commit this violence. They have a personal understanding, it tends to be. And one thing that's also important and unfortunate also to understand is that sanctuaries, so places where people seek safety or guidance. So sanctuaries such as places of worship, like a church or a temple, synagogue, are at significant risk because these are areas where people tend to mass in a crowd and tend to be very vulnerable. And I'm sure if people go through their memory Rolodex of all these incidences, we know recently there's been shootings at churches, and this continues, unfortunately, to happen in this country. So the inequalities with mass violence, and particularly gun violence. So Gifford's Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, another wonderful resource, notes that Black Americans are 2 times more likely to die from gun violence when compared to white Americans. And continuing on the train of inequalities and health inequalities, Black men make up over half, 52% of the gun homicide victims in the US. So people who are dying from gun violence, half of them are men of African American descent. So despite them making up only 6% of the population. So if we have 325 million people in the United States, only 6% of that population is African American. However, Black Americans disproportionately make up the people who are harmed by gun violence. So this is a definite inequality that needs to be addressed. One organization, Gays Against Guns, which is an LGBTQ organization against firearm misuse, note that 40% of transgender youth attempt suicide. So with most of them, 92%, attempting this suicide by firearm. And the source of this is the Face of America. And so forth with inequalities. If someone is the perpetrator or commits mass violence, white perpetrators, so of European descent, tend to have their mental health first considered, whereas people of color who commit mass violence have their POC minority status first considered. So if we have a white identified person committing mass violence, we're quicker to say, oh, it was a mental health concern. And when it's a person of color committing mass violence, we're quicker to say, oh, they're a product of their environment or they never stood a chance. So there's inequalities with that. Moving on, we have a cluster of reactions that people in the US tend to have in regards to mass violence. So some of those include, but are not limited to, feelings of irritability, languish, malaise, lethargy, or a lack of feelings altogether. So either just feeling uncomfortable, sad, low energy, or not having any feelings altogether. On top of that, we sometimes have negative self-talk. So people reacting to all this mass violence portrayed in the media or just in their environment, they bash themselves. Or sometimes they're mad at themselves for not being as productive or feeling disconnected from others. So continuing on, sometimes people's reactions to mass violence could include feeling numb, feeling foggy, kind of like that brain fog people were feeling with COVID, or feeling devoid of feelings altogether, so empty on the inside. And to a clinical degree, if these feelings continue, sometimes they can develop into what's called depersonalization or derealization. So depersonalization, meaning you don't feel connected to yourself or your body. Derealization is you don't feel connected to the environment around you or the world. And also a common reaction to mass violence is post-traumatic stress symptoms. So these can include sleep disturbances, sleeping issues, having intrusive negative thoughts or memories recurring. This could include avoiding internal, so thoughts and memories and feelings, or external triggers that remind you of a negative event or maybe make you fear a negative event coming. This can include these PTSD symptoms. It can also include feeling keyed up, feeling on the edge, or just feeling overall fearful, sometimes for no reason. Or some people can feel what's called survivor guilt. So feeling guilty that you were either untouched or not harmed by a situation, but other people were. It's kind of like that, why not me? Why them, not me? So here are some more other common reactions to mass violence. So sometimes if there is a mass violent event, sometimes people become fixated, meaning they focus or just kind of almost obsess over the event. Or they might have nightmares or night terrors, or they may have flashbacks to the event. This is similar to the frequent intrusive negative thoughts about an event. Continuing on, some people may feel hypervigilant, which is similar to that keyed up feeling. Some people also nicknamed as paranoia too. Feeling a sense of general unease, or sometimes we're just occupied by fear that more mass violence is going to happen. I see this similar It's very much anxious distress, and I see it similar to kind of like panic attacks. After someone has maybe their first panic attack, what's one of their number one fears? The next panic attack. So I see this similar kind of crosswalk to mass violence. Once mass violence maybe happens around someone's area, one of their biggest fears is, okay, when is this going to happen again, or where is this going to happen again, and will I be involved or caught up in this? Continuing on, more common reactions people may have are feelings of powerlessness or questioning why the events of life happen as they do, just questioning, why am I here? Why does this happen? And not always finding answers, which can be very frustrating for people, especially in a vulnerable state. Also, dreading the thought of more isolation, because many people think, well, if one of the number one factors in being caught in mass violence is being in public, well, maybe I should just stay at home and become a recluse or a hermit. That's not necessarily what I'm saying, and we'll get to the skills on that later, but people could just be dreading the thought of just being more isolated in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the monkeypox outbreak, or other mass health concerns that are going to happen throughout our lifespan. People are fearful of mass isolation in general, and people also, the mass isolation, the lockdown, or shelter at place that we went through over the past two years, they left a bad taste in people's mouth. So people are really inclined to be out in the world, be out in public, which unfortunately puts them more at risk for mass violence. And last on this slide, sometimes people lose themselves in what's called doom scrolling. So such as spending hours on social media, consuming content that only permeates or just worsens our mood after. So many of us, myself included, I'm guilty of this, sometimes just doom scroll. We're just consuming content online, and it really just focuses on the negative. And to be fair, it's part of our human evolution for our thoughts to focus on the negative, because focusing on the negative helps us stay alive, helps keep us safe. So the quick example I always use is, if you're in a family of cave people back in caveman days, and the group of you were walking around, and on that same day, some of you found berries and ate the berries, some of you found a river, and things like that. These are important. We need water, we need food, to stay alive. If someone had some of those berries and maybe they were poisoned and they felt sick, our brain is more inclined to focus on the negative than the positive. So it's much more helpful for our brains to remember the negative berries that are going to make us feel sick, rather than the positive of, oh, we found a river over there, that's going to give us water. Both are important, but your mind focuses a little more on the negative than the positive, because again, focusing on the negative helps us avoid situations that are going to harm us. So there are ways to take care of ourselves during mass violence. So over the span of 2 decades, my mentor, Professor Emily Diamond, director of the Health Inequality Studies, which I'm a researcher in that group, has compiled her clinical observations and experiences and research into these care sheets that I'm referencing throughout this talk. One of them being taking care of ourselves in the midst of violence, and another care sheet entitled Taking Care of Ourselves in Troubled Times. Below are highlights, and on the next few slides are highlights which of these care sheets, and these care sheets are available for free download at healthinequalitystudies.org under the Our Work tab at the masthead of the website. So straight from these care sheets, the following are some tips that are really helpful during these troubling times. So the following are some suggestions that might help you during this time of increased violence. Feel free to take what works and feel free to leave behind what doesn't. So maybe you're not feeling as productive or as cheerful. Why shouldn't the violence that we are exposed to have an impact? It's okay for it to have an impact. It's often meant as if these negative mass violence events are meant to be an act of terror, it makes sense that we feel worried or fearful. Okay, so be kind to yourself if you experience any of the negative reactions that I described a few slides ago. So there may be actions that people might consider, such as writing a poem or doing a drawing, something to help process their emotions. I mean, being creative is a great way to help people process things. It doesn't have to be good, whatever you produce, but it helps you express how you feel. So, for example, you may have a garden, you may plant something in remembrance. I mean, you can call on your elected officials and people to help. I mean, there are many ways that you can be proactive in helping yourself. You can contribute to a cause or those impacted by violence altogether. Next on this list, so in our own lives, we can think about whether the violence around us means we need to make changes. So perhaps it means getting more mental health care. It might mean spending more time with people you cherish. It can mean making sure you eat well and get enough rest because the stress is taking a toll on you. So these are just excerpts on ways that we can help ourselves. And again, these care sheets are available for anyone who's looking for it. So more on taking care of ourselves. Below are more highlights from Professor Diamond's Taking Care of Ourselves in the Midst of Violence care sheet for specifically when your community has been impacted by a mass casualty event or hate. So, top of the list. If the media asks you about your experience, feel free to decline to talk with them, and especially if you don't feel ready or comfortable about being interviewed. You don't have to do this. Many people feel pressured to, and sometimes media outlets like to just catch people raw in the moment to really express the disdain, but also that's not always as affirming to our experience, especially because in the wake of something, we're still processing, we're still figuring it out. So don't think you have to get on camera and talk about what you're still processing. So if a person has been injured, it's common to tell the person that they're lucky to be alive, but they may not feel lucky. They may be in pain, have new disabilities, experience trauma, or feel just very unlucky. So Dr. Diamond suggests an alternative. I'm so glad that you survived. So again, instead of trying to do gratitude work, which really isn't as effective in this current moment, especially in the wake of any traumatic events, gratitude work is maybe for a later time. Instead of saying, I'm so feel lucky to be alive, just I'm so glad you survived, or I'm so glad you're still here. Next, if you've ever struggled, so in light of a mass, violent event in your environment, if you've ever struggled with mental health problems or a substance abuse concern, consider getting formal help or increasing the formal help that you're already receiving. Violence can make a lot of issues much worse. And so this could increase feelings of hopelessness, meaninglessness, or just our belief in chaos in the world. This could also make worse our feelings of grief, stress, or anxiety. Also, just being in the environment of mass violence, it could worsen our sleep, again, giving us sleep issues like with post-traumatic stress, or it can sometimes make things worse if we've already had insomnia or a sleep issue. So just be kind to yourself. And if you notice any of these experiences, try to connect it to this resource here of understanding that it's okay, it can get better. The next point on this is a critical time for people may not be when communities increase solidarity, closeness, or empathy. I know that, bear with me with this. It may be when there is a perception that some people are moving on and a person feels left behind. So they may wonder why they're not able to be as resilient, or if they're becoming a burden because their pain remains significant. So what this means is, yes, the event itself, the mass violent event happening, that is significant. But also another trying time for people is when the majority of people have tended to process the event or move on, leaving behind those who don't feel like they fully processed it. And sometimes those individuals who don't feel fully processed in a mass violent event feel left behind, or they almost feel like they're being disrespectful to the situation, or they may just be feeling guilty, or somehow like they're the problem because they still haven't fully processed everything. Accept that everyone can process on their own timeline, and that's okay. And if you are part of the group that has processed and moved on, try to hold space for others who may still be struggling. So next, we're going to talk about managing our distress and managing feelings of paranoia. So first off, let's understand the difference between preparedness and paranoia. Paranoia kind of gets a bad reputation. It just means when you feel on alert when there's no real evidence to suggest that you should be on alert. But given the political climate, given how things are going on in the United States, and given the just increasing number of mass violent events, it sounds pretty warranted to me. It sounds like we do deserve to have this awareness, this vigilance about the situation. So I would argue that no one who is concerned about mass violence is paranoid per se. I would suggest reframing it as preparedness. Being prepared, and as some of the skills we'll talk about, having a safety plan, that's just being prepared. That's just developing safety awareness, and for a time when hopefully you'll never have to use it, but if you do, again, you were prepared. That's a good thing. So try to begin developing you and your loved ones' plan on what to do if caught in mass violence. So when we're in public, we're in mass events, we tend to have, other people with us. So start placing in the conversation of everyday language, start talking about what your preparedness plan would be, what your safety plan would be. I often hear just anecdotally people kind of joke about it. They say like, oh, I would just lay down, or I would just let them have me. Maybe try just actually extending that conversation from kind of the jokes to actually the seriousness. What would we actually do if we were caught in an event? Or, when we're a group of us 5 are going to a concert, what would we do if we were caught in the mass violence? What if something negative happened here? Or what if at this sporting event, something were to happen? Like, what would we actually do? So some tips for this, informed by law enforcement, are learn to become aware of one's surroundings when in public. And this is a skill to develop. So be nice to yourself if you haven't fully developed this skill yet, or if this is news to you. So try to be mindful, and not try. Try in the beginning, and then make good efforts to know where the exits are. When you enter a room, is the door you just walked in the only way out, or are there other ways out? Okay. Assess the risk of being bottlenosed when you're leaving a space. So bottlenose is, think of it like a bottle, and the nose kind of filters and gets narrow. So sometimes when we're trying to leave a big room, it narrows to maybe one door. That's a bottlenose. So be aware of this. If we're caught in a bottlenose event and there's mass violence, it's hard for people to exit that situation and therefore might get harmed. Develop the skill on how to get to safety. So this means knowing who safe people are to be around, who's meant there to protect you or help you, and just start developing the skill of just seeking safety when you need to. It's never a shame to ask for help when you need it, and it's never a shame to run away from a situation. Okay. Also, in terms of mass violence, begin to educate yourself and learn on what key sounds are. So I hate to acknowledge this, but it benefits us to know what an actual gunfire sounds like versus a car backfiring, or versus just an object, popping or something like that. It actually benefits us to maybe do an online search and learn, or ask someone who you know is a gun owner, what a gun sound actually sounds like. Because we so often hear, popping sounds, exploding sounds when it's not like a detonation device. And we often fear that it's a gun. So learn to know what the key sounds of mass violence could be, what an actual exploding object may sound like, what a firearm actually sounds like when it fires, and so forth. And then next, begin to ask yourself if situations are too crowded or unsafe. So just be mindful when you enter a crowded area. Sometimes an area is too crowded, or if you notice that there is really only one way in, one way out, and that people may be bottlenosed, ask yourself if you belong there, if you should be there. Only you can determine, what your safety is, but just, again, develop the skill of this mindful awareness of your situation. This is safety awareness. And also, coming straight from law enforcement, we are intuitive creatures. Humans are very sensitive, empathic, and observant. So if your gut tells you to leave, leave. Don't even second guess yourself. Trust yourself. Trust your intuition. It's there to help you and help you avoid situations that may be harmful. Last, also really keep in mind that we have, smart devices these days. Many phones have a section where you can put your health information. Many people have a little piece of paper or card that they keep in their wallet, or at least on them, on their person somewhere. And so having vital, sensitive, or important health information about you is really helpful if you're caught in mass violence and are injured. It helps the people, the EMTs, the paramedics, the people who are supposed to help you. It really helps them know how best and quickly to help you. So keep it discreet on you because it's your health information, but keep it easily accessible if you need it. So next, consider limiting your time in mass gatherings altogether, and choose which ones you want to attend with a little more stringency. So Dr. Diamond of the Health Inequality Studies Research Group notes to consider what's called a violence diet, or have like a violence budget, an economy, or just how much violence you're willing to consume and how much potential risk of violence you're willing to be around. So ask yourself, How much violence do you consume for entertainment? Do you like movies with big explosions? Do you like books with a lot of violent content? Now, I'm not putting a judgment either way, but ask yourself, how much violence are you willing to absorb in your day-to-day life? And when you do choose to go to public or mass events, ask how much risk you're willing to assess. So, is this an event once in a lifetime for you, or is this something that could be done maybe remotely? Is this something that doesn't have to involve risk? Is this an event where you can choose to maybe be closer to an exit? Keep all of these things in mind going forward, because I'm not telling you to become a hermit or a recluse or just not be in public anymore. It's with the healthy understanding that being in public inevitably puts us all at risk. So also consider working with a psychotherapist in conjunction, always with a psychiatrist or a medical prescriber, to address any clinical issues such as depression, anxiety, insomnia, or post-traumatic stress, in your life. If you're already living with a mental health condition, which 1 in 4, Americans do, we don't want it worsened by suffering or vicariously suffering a negative event. And what I mean by vicarious is you don't have to actually experience something. You could hear a story about it, or someone could tell you about it, or you could witness a violent event, and that's vicariously experiencing it as well. So it's kind of by proxy. So, and if you're already connected to a psychotherapist, continue this good work and ask your therapist about any trauma-based interventions that are compatible with what's called resilience-based interventions. And your therapist will be knowledgeable about this if you do. Because again, it's, as I was saying before, it's never bad to ask for help. Strength is vulnerability. So when we develop the skill of being able to ask for help when we need it, that's one of the best ways to keep ourselves safe, by having good, strong support through asking people questions. So what can we do amidst all of this mass violence? Well, if you have worked on yourself, maybe developed your violence diet, your violence budget, seeing how much you're willing to consume for entertainment, how much risk you're willing to absorb when you go out into the world, if you find that you're at a stable place and you're actually comfortable with the amount of violence you want to consume and maybe put yourself in, you can start to become proactive and take action on behalf of yourself and behalf of others. So what I highly advise is do your own research on how to obtain gun restraining orders in your state. Here in California, we have the ability to get a gun restraining order. Governor Newsom has put into law that if we suspect that someone may commit mass violence or at least gun violence, we can actually petition for that person to be restrained by the law to not even have a gun or not have access to their guns. So some of the criteria that could trigger this are a person noting that they have a hit list. Some people proudly talking about or even joking about wanting to go postal, which back in the day that meant just opening a firearm at a post office. So things like that. If someone is a little too proud about their weapons, if people are very nonchalant about it, if you know that people aren't properly securing or safely storing their weapons, all of this can be part of or if people acknowledge that they have a list of people that they want to harm, this is all criteria that you could put when petitioning or asking for a restraining order specifically about someone having a gun. Also, I encourage you to educate yourself on consumers, people who buy firearms, actually being able to sue gun manufacturers. And this is directly from Governor Newsom as well. He believes that much like we can sue a car manufacturer for providing a faulty device, we should be able to sue gun manufacturers for providing objects that could promote mass violence. Now, this is hotly debated right now. The angle that the law is taking in California is that, sure, we know that guns are able to fire bullets. Okay, if a person chooses to fire some bullets at another person to harm them or end their life, people still believe that that's their choice. Now, I'm not taking a stance on this, but I'm noting that the business professional angle they're taking is that some guns are allowed to be altered a little too easily. So some guns are easily able to be made into an illegal weapon. So if a manufacturer is not making it difficult to alter a device, that they should be held accountable for this. We often see that the perpetrators of mass violence alter their weapons, their guns, in order to do more harm and more damage. So that's the angle they're taking with consumers being able to sue firearm manufacturers. Next, which I mentioned a little bit earlier ago, try writing to your elected representatives. I know that this gets said a whole lot, and people always just say, write to your congressman, or write to local government. How do you do that? Well, I've provided on this resource from the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, on their way of walking you through how to write to an elected official. These are the people who make the laws. We put them in office. So it behooves us, it benefits us all to learn how to write to them and to speak our mind and to fight for ourselves, advocate for ourselves. So there's a little link on how to prepare you for that. If you are in a space where you're able to become proactive and take action against mass violence, particularly gun violence, you could start to attend and support peaceful demonstrations. You can organize peaceful demonstrations to express your concerns with like-minded folks. The adages of this as well is, if you find a group of like-minded folks, you've also basically just found a support group of people who you can support each other during times. So becoming politically active and expressing your political views can very much be helpful. One thing I also recommend too, do some of your own research and inform others of what you find. And I'll have a slide soon on what doing your own research looks safer like. Also, a big term that I use a lot: hold space for others if you feel you have the capacity to do so and enough support of your own. Holding space is simply just giving a sympathetic ear, a shoulder to cry on, or just letting another person verbalize, say what's on their mind in order to help them feel better. And you'll find, and I say this as a psychologist, holding space for others also benefits you. It helps you hear about another person's experience. It helps you understand how another human views this world. And it helps you help somebody else, which usually feels good. So in light of mass violence, whether you've experienced it, directly or indirectly, we should talk about honoring a tragedy without ruminating. What I mean by ruminating, that's when we tend to become fixed or almost obsessed, not officially, but almost obsessed with a topic. So sometimes we can honor something that's happened, but sometimes we get too lost in it and we find ourselves identifying through a problem or a tragedy that happened. So again, you don't have to be directly involved in mass violence to feel its impacts, or you don't have to directly be involved in mass violence to stand in solidarity or advocate for others. So on your own time, because again, we should meet people where they're at. Some people grieve quickly, some people grieve a little slower. So on your own timeline, try to honor and acknowledge any losses you may have experienced. So the loss of loved ones, the loss of a sense of safety, etc. Again, we don't have to lose a life for us to feel like we lost something in light of a tragic event. Remember that processing grief can be done with support or internally inside ourselves. Again, on one's own time. So some people like to process on their own internally. Some people like to process in a group externally. That's fine. Both are okay. If there are tragic events, consider reframing tragic anniversaries as memorials or even celebrations if you feel you've processed enough and the group at large has processed enough. And if you can, consider reclaiming for yourself the tragic dates of events on your own time. Think about it. September 11th, 2002, 2003. Those were not very pleasant days. But now some people, through enough time processing, through enough time just passing, and through people, exploring the tragic events of 9/11, September 11th doesn't always have to be a negative date. Some people can actually find empowerment through the support that this country gathered, in times of peril. So it's all perspective with this. We are humans. We're all susceptible to what's called the anniversary effect. So after a significant event has happened on a particular date or time, typically 3 years out, it tends to repeat in our mind over and over again. So if a significant life event happens, we tend to recall it 2-3 years out. Same thing with tragic events. So just accept that that's a part of the human condition. You're normal if it happens. And again, a way to honor a tragedy without becoming fixated on it, talk to a therapist and ask them about grief counseling interventions. This can help you honor, respect an event, and also move past it. So, one helpful skill with dealing with mass violence, filter your online consumption. So, as we've talked about groom scrolling moments ago, try to identify and adjust any groom scrolling by making efforts to strike a balance between staying informed to current events and updates while not falling down the rabbit hole of mindlessly scrolling on your phone. That's what these devices are for. They're meant to entertain us and keep us engaged. That's how these companies that manufacture these devices make money. So you can, I'm not saying don't go on social media, don't consume any online content, but I am saying if it's doom scrolling, be mindful of this. Try to strike a balance. I would never tell anyone to not follow the news or not follow current events. We all have the right to stay informed, but once you've obtained, facts and information, try to move on to another topic. One tip that I advise is ask yourself, when you are consuming content online, ask yourself if you're consuming information or entertainment. Information leaves you with a fact or something that you didn't know before. Entertainment usually leaves you with some other feeling. You either feel happy, maybe sad, laughter, or something, or fear. So ask yourself again, is this informational or is this entertainment? Next, be mindful of how much content you consume. Be mindful if the content focuses on fear, paranoia, anticipating worst case scenarios. This tends to fall under the entertainment aspect too, because if we get a person to be scared on a topic, they're going to want to stay informed. They're going to want to just keep repeating or refreshing a website or checking over and over and over again, every couple minutes. So be mindful of this. Next, your violence budget or your violence diet can include maybe setting timers before you open social media, or just when maybe also designating a time that, okay, this is going to be the hour that I check up on news, or this is going to be, I'm going to limit myself to only scrolling or even doom scrolling just for 15 minutes, just for 30 minutes. I advise limiting as much doom scrolling as possible, but from a harm reduction or limiting the amount of harm stance that we have when we're consuming something, maybe just setting a timer. So putting a timer on your phone or such that, okay, I'm allowed 15 minutes of doom scrolling, or I'm only allowed, 25 minutes of looking at the news. These are some tips that can help. So the next big topic, doing your own research. This is not just limited to gun violence or mass violence at large. It helps a lot of us, especially in an era of mass media and mass information, to do your own research. This is probably the largest era of knowledge we have right now. We have the collective consciousness, the collective knowledge of mankind in the palm of our hands, or just a few clicks away. So we all basically have the tools to do good, reputable research. So I encourage people to do their own research with reputable sources. What this means is try to use sources, people that give you information that listed their information within the past 5 years. I mean, there's always exceptions to this, but try to keep the knowledge you consume to the most recent 5 years. Ask yourself if the sources you find have credibility and what supports their credibility. So are you getting this from a government institution, or if you're getting this from Joe down the street? Are you getting information from like a professor, or are you getting it from your uncle who is not? So ask yourself these things. Okay. Remember, a reputable source is one that shows its own sources, so where they got their facts from, and those sources tend to not influence the findings. Also remember that reputable resources are based in facts or educated opinions. So when researchers don't always have a fact, they do an educated guess. They use the information they have to make the best probable decision going forward. And remember, it's not opinions. When it's a personal opinion or an emotional opinion, that's not a reputable source. That's just what someone thinks. So listen to the words people use. If they say my professional opinion or my educated opinion or my Educated hypothesis, these are the terms you want to hear when someone's giving an opinion that's not really a fact quite yet. Remember that reputable resources do not adjust any data or information for their own purpose. So they do not have a conflict of interest, meaning that they have their own agenda. They don't have a conflict of interest with the plans for some other organization. If some other person or entity has a goal in mind, and this may influence the data that they put out there, that kind of questions if it's a reputable source. So in the era of mass information and multimedia and just the internet, you'll find tons of misinformation from non-reputable resources on the internet. So be thorough, be optimistically skeptical, and always be curious when doing your own research. Okay. So for example, Wikipedia, it isn't all bad. It sometimes gets a bad rep. But the next time you use this method of research, try going to, like if you use a Wikipedia article, try going to the article's sources at the end and double check any facts you find. The reason people don't always think Wikipedia is reputable because anyone can edit it. So that means anyone, a very informed person and someone who's just basing their thoughts off their opinions. So that's why people challenge that method so much. But I don't think it's all bad. I think if it's done wisely and correctly, Wikipedia can be a fine, reputable source. So last, be mindful of getting into arguments with folks online when you share your research findings. Remember, 2/3 of the online trolls that you may encounter are robots anyway. And this is supported by research within the past 5 years. So part of these skills in overcoming and grappling and wrestling with mass violence, we want to move people from sometimes a sense of numbness to a sense of mindfulness, that word I've been using a lot today. So try to develop mindful practices to combat any feelings of numbness, detachment, jadedness, or overall desensitization. So some skills that you can get more info on by doing an online search are things such as, there's a technique called focus on the colors you see. There's also a technique called mindfulness with eating an orange. So you have an orange in hand, and through guided meditation, you can mindfully learn to develop these skills. Taking mindful walks is a great way to start becoming more mindful and aware of the environment around you. This also helps with safety awareness. So becoming mindful is wonderful for many ways. There's also guided audio meditations that can help you develop mindfulness skills and meditative practices. I would also really look into yoga or just moving your body in some way that helps you reconnect to your mind and your body. So this could be going to physical therapy. This could be yoga. This could be another sport that, inevitably forces you to focus on your breathing and focus on the movements of your body. Also, try learning techniques such as loving kindness and self-compassion mantras. These are kind of scripts through meditation that help you develop compassion, sympathy, and empathy, and also just help you be nicer to yourself and to others. These are ways to help combat feelings of languish, unease, and negative thinking patterns overall. So, managing one's own reactions to mass violence. What I suggest is try to reframe your thoughts from what's called a resilience-based perspective, checking out, like with feelings of depersonalization, paradoxically show that you already have the ability to suspend thoughts, which is the goal in healthy meditative practice anyway. So try using this skill you may have already possessed more effectively with some help from loved ones and support group or maybe a therapist. So what I mean by that is a resilience-based perspective. That means let's highlight the strengths and skills a person already has. Let's try to shift our focus from the negative to shifting towards the positive. This is more times when gratitude work, focusing on what you already have and what you already have to support you, that's when it comes into play more. So from this resilience-based perspective, it's helpful to, want to form a support group with people. So what I mean by this is sometimes people check out, some people go numb. So reminding a person, oh, you have the ability to check out or you have the ability to zone out from this. Okay, so you already have the ability to stop your thinking patterns. We call this in therapy thought stopping. If you already have the ability to thought stop and you go numb, well, let's use this skill to thought stop and get you to focus on the positive, redirect you from the negative to the positive. So that's what I mean by this bullet point. Next, connect with your community using the resources in this talk provided, or by reaching out to loved ones to share your reactions to mass violence. So this is another great way of cultivating support. When we have support from like-minded people who are willing to just be there for us, this helps ease our sense of distress. And again, when you do find yourself in a more grounded place, able to help and support others, remember to try holding space for others, because it's going to come back to you threefold. If you go out of your way to hold space for somebody, down the road, that same person or another person may hold space for you. So that's how we form a network of people to help us and provide our tribe of helpful people. So shifting gears to people who are providers and first responders, amidst all this mass violence, it really benefits us to have self-care. So to any of the fellow healthcare providers in the audience, it's really good to have a professional plan in place if mass violence occurs on the job. So a professional plan, it's better described on the hyperlink here, and it helps us understand, what to do in our professional settings when we're on the job and something tragic may happen. For providers and first responders, it's really good for us to also have a personal plan, what we do in our personal life with our loved ones. So sometimes we often don't remember that we have multiple, parts of our personality. We have a personal life, we have a professional life. So it's good to develop a plan in case mass violence happens in all those dimensions of ourselves. Sometimes the healers need to get healed themselves. So if you are a provider or first responder in the midst of mass violence, and maybe your clients come to you with these issues, obtain more training or brush up on grief counseling, trauma-focused and resiliency-focused interventions. Your clients are really going to thank you for this. As a provider, schedule some self-check-ins. It's always good to remind ourselves that we're human, so brush up on what we need to, hold space for others, but also hold space for ourselves. So as a provider, consider having or increasing your own talk therapy or your own medication management, to help you ease through this. If you're also experiencing a time of distress, also remember, maybe if you're already taking medications for psychological concerns, well, maybe they deserve an adjustment, maybe an increase or a decrease of whatever it is you're taking. And as a provider, educate yourself on the pathway to violence. So, and this is important for all persons to know, this is how things escalate from thinking about harming others to actually doing it. It's called the pathway to violence. So some excerpts from the pathway to violence are warning behaviors. So people who commit mass violence tend to file a lot of grievances. They tend to complain about situations a lot. They tend to blame the environment for the problems in their life. So if you hear this, I'm not saying, oh, this person is going to be a mass shooter. I'm just saying these are the building blocks of the profile of the type of person who might harm others in mass. So again, warning behaviors such as filing multiple grievances, multiple complaints just about the world and society, blaming the environment and the world for their problems, not claiming the onus or not acknowledging where they may be the problem. Sometimes they identify an enemy. Sometimes in therapy, we call this splitting. They identify me from others. And sometimes people who really initiate mass violence, they have a hit list. So they either have a mental list or physical written or typed list of people they want to get even with, get revenge with, or just harm outright. Also, people who tend to commit mass violence tend to adopt excessive suicidality. So there's a thin line between suicidality, wanting to end one's own life, and homicidality, which is harming other people's lives. So if a person already, for lack of a better term, becomes comfortable with thoughts of self-harm, it's a thin line between being comfortable with self-harm to harming others. So again, I am not labeling anyone who's ever dealt with suicidal thoughts or thoughts of self-harm. I am not saying a person who's ever wanted to harm themselves is going to commit mass violence. These are all a cluster of symptoms we tend to see in people who perpetrate violence. So with diagnosis and healthcare overall, it takes more than one symptom to be diagnosed something. So it takes a cluster of these experiences I just described and more for someone to fit the profile of, someone who commits mass violence. But it always benefits all of us to know what this pathway to violence is. So remember, as a provider, to identify the path from research and planning when someone is just finding out how to harm others to when they actually prepare to harm others. A good example is like the psychology of the Columbine shooters. They had a long span of preparation before and their planning before they actually committed their atrocities, on April 20th, 1999. Okay, so for providers, if there is violence in your practice, again, for your own support, research if your group or clinic has an EAP program to help guide you. Consider scheduling time off to recalibrate and ground yourself, because you can't pour from an empty cup. Also consider stating in your consent form the boundaries on what behaviors will be tolerated and not tolerated in your professional space. And make sure this is clear between clients, staff, and personnel. Know the emergency exit plan in place for your office space. Discuss these matters openly with clients and with colleagues. And just get comfortable with that, because mass violence it's in our society right now. So it really benefits us to learn to have these conversations, these uncomfortable conversations. Remember to schedule check-ins with colleagues as needed. And I'm just going to continue with resources for people. So I have a plethora of resources here. We have the APA's article on mass violence and shootings. We have resources on coping skills, some listed here. We have the FBI's resources on how to handle an active shooter situation. We have the organization Gays Against Guns. We have an article on how to talk to kids about school shootings. We have more resources such as the Rebels Project. This came from the Columbine Massacre, and these were students. Rebels were the mascot for the school. I believe they still are, but they formed a group to support others who go through similar events. We have SAMHSA, so that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administrators. Information on recognizing and treating child traumatic stress. We also have from them resources on how to cope with incidences of mass violence. We also have the 10 gun violence facts about Black, Indigenous, and other POC. And then we have another article on talking to children about violence, tips for parents and teachers. So a few more resources: the National Child Traumatic Stress Network school shooting resources, and the Victim Connect Resource Center on mass violence. So my closing thoughts on this topic. Surviving mass violence, even vicariously, can take a heavy toll on our collective health and mental well-being. This talk explored and normalized the various reactions people have to mass violence, along with skills and resources on how to better cope. These frequent acts of domestic terrorism in our country impact both our personal mental health and society at large in various ways. Learning to better understand and apply the coping skills explored in this talk can help us find balance and find/provide support. And last are the reputable resources I devised this talk from. And last, feel free to take a picture or keep this. These are good ways to get in contact with me, for me to provide up-to-date information on my research and more on this topic. So I want to thank everyone for their time. I want to thank everyone for showing up. And for people in the future watching this recording, again, thank you for showing up and just consuming this knowledge. Feel free to disseminate it, share it with anyone you feel would be of benefit. Also, please, if you find other information, if you find any updated information on anything I said or any contrary information, please, I welcome it. Send it my way. My information is all listed here, and I look forward to hearing from people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Espinoza. That was a very detailed and informative and coherent talk that I've ever heard on this topic, and this sensitive topic. I'm sure everybody who watched this learned so much from this, and hopefully we can share this with others. Thank you so much, and we are very grateful to have professional people like you to come here and give us the access to all the information, and thank you for all the resources that you gave us. I can't thank you enough. If there's no other questions, actually, you answered all the questions that my teen councils had, and they are all answered. Thank you.
Great. And again, this slide deck is available for download off my website, and then this recording is going to be on YouTube. So sounds like we're good.
Thank you. Please feel free to check the calendar of the events on LAPL's webpage and for upcoming other mental health series and all programs in LAPL. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.